Muchas gracias. Bienvenidos a todos. Thank you very much. Welcome to everyone. I'd like to thank Serena, Michael, and the staff at Books Are Magic for giving this Brooklyn boy a chance to come home. I was born um, in the East New York section of Brooklyn in 1957, and here we are. Special thanks to my conversation partner, Carlos Andrés Gómez. You'll be hearing from him later. And a very special thanks to my wife, Lauren, who has been a vitally important part of this whole process since the very beginning and even up to the last minute in ways you could not possibly imagine. I'm going to read five poems altogether, and then Carlos and I will have a conversation about the book, followed by an opportunity for your questions. And it makes sense for me to begin with the title poem itself, and that is floaters. And people, of course, want to know, what does that mean? They have theories. This is what it means. You might recall two Salvadoran migrants, father and daughter, who came to be known as Oscar and Valeria, drowned crossing Rio Grande in June of 2019. A photograph of their bodies went viral, sparking outrage and grief and trutherism. A post in the I'm 1015 Border Patrol Facebook group charged that the photo was faked. The poem speaks to the photograph and the conspiracy theory behind those charges. So, floaters takes its title from the term used by certain members of the Border Patrol to describe those who drown crossing over. And that brings me to the first poem of the evening, the title poem of this collection, Floaters. Epigraph. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and ask, have you all ever seen floaters this clean? I'm not trying to be an ass, but I have never seen floaters like this. Could this be another edited photo? We've all seen the Dems and liberal parties do some pretty sick things. Anonymous post, I'm 1015 Border Patrol Facebook group. Like a beer bottle thrown into the river by a boy too drunk to cry. Like the shard of a styrofoam cup drained of coffee brown is the river. Like the plank of a fishing boat broken in half by the river, the dead float. And the dead have a name. Floaters, say the men of the Border Patrol, keeping watch all night by the river, hearts pumping coffee as they say the word floaters, soft as a bubble, hard as a shoe, as it nudges the body to see if it breathes, to see if it moans, to see if it sits up and speaks. And the dead have names. A feast day parade of names, names that dress all in red, names that twirl skirts, names that blow whistles, names that shake rattles, names that sing in praise of the saints. Say Oscar Alberto Martinez Ramirez. Say Angie Valeria Martinez Avalos. See how they rise off the tongue, a calling of bird to bird somewhere in the trees above our heads, trilling in the dark heart of the leaves. Say what we know of them now they are dead. Oscar slapped dough for pizza with oven blistered fingers. Daughter Valeria sang, banging a toy guitar. He sipped free the apron he wore in the blast of the oven, sold the motorcycle he would kick till it sputtered to life, counted off pesos for the journey across the river, and the last of his 25 years, and the last of her 23 months. There is another name that beats its wings in the heart of the trees. Say, Tania, Vanessa, Avalos, Oscar's wife and Valeria's mother, the witness stumbling along the river. Now, their names rise off her tongue. Say, Oscar y Valeria. He swam from Matamoros across to Brownsville. The girl slung around his neck, stood her in the weeds on the Texas side of the river, swore to return with her mother in hand, turning his back as fathers do, who later say, I turned around and she was gone. In the time it takes for a bird to hop from branch to branch, Valeria jumped in the river after her father. Maybe he called out her name as he swept her up from the river. Maybe the river drowned out his voice as the water swept them away. Tanya called out the names of the saints, but the saints drowsed in the stupor of birds in the dark, their cages covered with blankets. The men on patrol would never hear their pleas for asylum, watching for floaters, hearts pumping coffee all night on the Texas side of the river. No one, they say, had ever seen floaters this clean. Oscar's black shirt yanked up to the armpits, Valeria's arm slung around her father's neck, even after the light left her eyes, both face down in the weeds back on the Mexican side of the river. Another edited photo. See how her head disappears in his shirt, the waterlogged diaper bunched in her pants, the blue of the blue cans. The radio warned us about the crisis actors we see at one school shooting after another. The man called Oscar will breathe, sit up, speak, tug the black shirt over his head, shower off the mud, and shake hands with the photographer. Yet, the floaters did not float down the Rio Grande like Olympians showing off the backstroke, nor did their souls float up to Dallas, land of rumored jobs and a president shot in the head as he waved from his motorcade. No bubbles rose from their breath in the mud, light as the iridescent circles of soap that would fascinate a 2-year-old. And the dead still have names. Names that sing in praise of the saints, names of flower and blossoms of white, a cortege of names dressed all in black, trailing the coffins to the cemetery. Carve their names in headlines and gravestones they would never know in the kitchens of this cacophonous world. Enter their names in the book of names. Say Oscar Alberto Martinez Ramirez. Say Angie Valeria Martinez Avalos. Bury them in a corner of the cemetery named for the sainted Archbishop of the Poor, shot in the heart saying Mass, bullets bought by the taxes I paid when I worked as a bouncer and fractured my hand 40 years ago, and bumper stickers read, El Salvador is Spanish for Vietnam. When the last bubble of breath escapes the body, may the men who speak of floaters, who have never seen floaters this clean, float through the clouds to the heavens, where they paddle the air as they wait for the saint who flips through the keys on his ring like a drowsy janitor till he fingers the key that turns the lock and shuts the gate on their babble-tongued faces, and then they plunge back to earth, a shower of hailstones pelting the river, the Mexican side of the river. Thank you. Carlos is actually the only one I can actually see. Another poem about immigration. Family separation is back in the news with the end of Trump's zero tolerance rule. 5,500 families, at least, were separated. The parents of more than 600 children still cannot be found. These were the kids in cages, incarcerated in internment camps on the border. And my good friend Camilo Perez Bustillo, who is here tonight listening in from Taipei, former advocacy director at the Hope Border Institute, was an organizer of the campaign to shut down the internment camp in Tornillo, Texas. He interviewed the migrant adolescents there, and that's how this next poem came about. Um, poem called Ode to the Soccer Ball Sailing Over a Barbed Wire Fence. Epigraph. Tornillo has become the symbol of what may be the largest U.S. mass detention of children not charged with crimes since the World War II internment of Japanese Americans. Robert Moore, Texas Monthly. Praise tornillo, word for screw in Spanish, word for jailer in English, word for 3,000 adolescent migrants incarcerated in camp. Praise the 3,000 soccer balls gift wrapped at Christmas as if raindrops in the desert inflated and bounced through the door. Praise the soccer games rotating with a whistle every 20 minutes so 3,000 adolescent migrants could take turns kicking a ball. Praise the boys and girls who walked 1,000 miles, blood caked in their toes, yelling in Spanish and a dozen Mayan tongues on the field. Praise the first teenager, brain ablaze like chili pepper Christmas lights, to kick a soccer ball high over the chain link and barbed wire fence. Praise the first teenager to scrawl a name and number on the face of the ball, then boot it all the way to the dirt road on the other side. Praise the smirk of teenagers at the jailer scooping up fugitive soccer balls, jabbering about the ingratitude of teenagers at Christmas. Praise the soccer ball sailing over the barbed wire fence, white and black like the moon, yellow like the sun, blue like the world. Praise the soccer ball flying to the moon, flying to the sun, flying to other worlds, flying to Antigua, Guatemala, where Starbucks buys coffee beans. Praise the soccer ball bounding off the lawn at the White House, thudding off the president's head as he waves to absolutely no one. Praise the piñata of the president's head, jelly beans pouring from his ears, enough to feed 3,000 adolescents incarcerated at Tornillo. Praise Tornillo, word in Spanish for adolescent migrant internment camp, abandoned by jailers in the desert, liberated by a blizzard of soccer balls. So indeed, I see Camilo is here, and I go on to my next poem. Well, I firmly believe that times of hate call for poems of love. My wife, Lauren, who I mentioned earlier, is a poet, a novelist, a teacher, and not by coincidence, the best person I know, best human being I know, very much deserving of love poetry. So, of course, I wrote her a love poem in the voice of a giant tortoise. And here it is now. Love Song of the Galapagos Tortoise. I am Lonesome George, the last Galapagos tortoise of Pinta Island. I see Darwin's hairy face on t-shirts and hats, backpacks and mugs. I see the statues. I can read the history books if someone turns the pages. I remember Darwin. I was there the day he landed in the ship named for a dog with floppy ears. He tried to lift me up and strained his groin. He climbed on my saddleback shell and tried to ride me, giggling like a boy on a birthday pony. He slipped off and rolled over in the surf, spitting sand. He watched me plod around in search of cactus to crunch, timing me with a pocket watch. He yelled in my ear to see if I was deaf, and I hissed in his face. He invited my tortoise brothers and sisters to board the Beagle. The crew hauled them up the gangplank as guests of honor. Darwin noted in his journal, young tortoises make excellent soup. Like the pirates and the whalers, the naturalists licked their spoons, soup in their beards, toasting the voyage with glasses of our urine. I am Lonesome George. I crane my leathery neck and hiss at everyone. I tuck my head inside my shell. You call and call my name till I peek out. I am a creature of the tropics who curses the icebergs of December. You dress me up in cardigan sweaters and wool scarves for winter. I groan about my gut, intimidating the curious with a drum roll of flatulence. You feed me the cactus of Pinta Island and pizza from the Jersey Shore. I am afraid of the toaster and dream of Darwin's beard caught in its coils. You are afraid of nothing as you make waffles jump from the glowing machine. I plod down the road as cars honk behind me, seafarers hungry for soup. You'll let me steer the car, even though the world is blurry, and you yell in my ear when the other cars cruise like pirate ships through stop signs. I will hiss at the next TV reporter who calls me Lonesome George. This world teems with pirates, whalers, and naturalists on parade, waving their spoons in the air, craving the delicacy of buttery tortoise flesh. But now I crane my neck to croak the love song of the Galapagos tortoise for you. And you swear I am your Frank Sinatra. I am your Sam Cooke. I sing better than Darwin. So that is a demonstration of my range. Not the kind of poem with which I am ordinarily associated. Well, we're here in Brooklyn. I mentioned that I am from Brooklyn. And I want to read a Brooklyn poem now. It's about a visionary. We need the visionaries, especially the visionaries who roll up their sleeves and get to work. Luis Garden Acosta was a dear friend and mentor, a brilliant activist who co-founded El Puente, a multi-service community center in the Williamsburg section of Brooklyn. That's right, Los Sures. I was in law school when Luis took me to an abandoned church to share his dream of what would become El Puente. This poem is called Morir Soñando, to die dreaming. Morir Soñando, for Luis Carden Acosta, 1945 to 2019, Brooklyn, New York. I saw the empty cross atop the empty church on South 4th Street, as if Jesus flapped his arms and flew away, spooked by one ambulance siren too many. I saw the stained glass windows I wanted to break with a brick, the mural of St. Mary and the angels hovering innocent as spies over the congregation, and wanted to know why you brought me here, the son of a man punched in the face by a priest for questioning the Trinity, who punched him back. This is El Puente, you said, the bridge. I knew about the Williamsburg Bridge, 8 lanes of traffic and the subway stampeding in the open windows of the barrio all summer. You spread your arms in that abandoned church and saw the spinning of a carousel better than any wooden horses pumping up and down a Coney Island. Here, the ESL classes for the neighbors curse with swollen tongues in English. There, the clinics on contraception, the pestilence in the veins of the unsuspecting. Here, the karate lessons, feet spearing the air to keep schoolyard demons away. There, the dancers in white swirling their skirts to the drumming of bomba. Here, the workshops on Puerto Rican history, La Masacre de Ponce, where your mother's beloved painted his last words on the street with a fingertip of blood. I was a law student. First year, memorizing law school Latin, listening to classical guitar on my boombox as I studied the rules of property. It's mine, it's not yours. I saw only what could be proven by a preponderance of the evidence. The church abandoned by the church, the cross atop the church abandoned by the Son of God. My belly empty as St. Mary of the Angels. I told you I was hungry, and we left. I wanted Chinese food, but you told me about the Chinese takeout down the block where you stood behind a man who shrieked about the price of wonton soup, left and returned with a can of gasoline, splashed it on the floor, and pulled a box of kitchen matches from his pocket. Will you wait till I pick up my egg roll and pork fried rice? You said, with a high school teacher's exasperated authority. So he did. You could talk an arsonist into postponing his inferno till you left with lunch, but you couldn't raise the dead in the ER at Greenpoint Hospital, even in your suit and tie. You couldn't convince the girl called Sugar to rise from the gurney after the gunshot drained the blood from her body. You couldn't persuade the doctor who peeled his gloves and shook his head to bring her back to life, telling him, do it again. An arsonist in medical scrubs trying to strike a wet match. You couldn't jumpstart the calliope in her heart, so the carousel of horses would rise and fall and rise again. Whenever you saw the gutted church, you would see the sheets of the gurney dipped in red, all the gurneys rolling into the ER with a sacrifice of adolescence. We walked to the luncheonette on Havemeyer Street. A red awning announced, Morir soñando, to die dreaming, you said, from the DR, my father's island. The boy at the counter, who spoke no English, brown as my father, called Martín like me, grinned the way you grinned at El Puente once, St. Mary of the Angels. He squeezed the oranges into a drizzle of juice with evaporated milk, cane sugar, and ice, shook the elixir, and poured it till the froth spilled over the lip of the glass. Foam freckled my snout as I raised my hand for another. Intoxicated by Morir Soñando number 3 and the prophet gently rocking at my table, I had a vision. ESL classes, healing the jaws wired shut by English, clinics full of adolescents studying the secrets of the body unspeakable in the kitchen or the confessional, karate students landing bare feet on the mat with a thump and grunt in unison. Bomba dancers twirling to a song in praise of Yoruba gods abolished by the priests, the words of Puerto Rican rebels painted on the walls by brushes dipped in every color, pressed in the pages of notebooks by a generation condemned to amnesia. Morir soñando. Luis, I know you died dreaming of South 4th Street, the banners that said no to the toxic waste plant down the block, or the Navy bombarding an island of fishermen for target practice thousands of miles away. Morir soñando. I know you died dreaming of gigantes, carnival máscaras bristling with horns that dangle with the angels at el puente. Morir soñando. I know you died dreaming of the next el puente. Morir soñando. I know you died dreaming of the hammer's claw, the drill whining to the screw, the dust like snow in a globe, then the shy genius raising her hand in the back of the room. Morir soñando. I know you died dreaming of the poets who stank of weed in the parking lot, then stood before the mic you electrified for them and rubbed their eyes when the faces in their poems gathered there waiting for the first word so we could all die dreaming. Morir soñando, intoxicated by the elixir of the tongue. Oh, rocking prophet at my table. Oh, what are you soñando? And this is my last poem. Luis had a political mentor. That was my father, um, Frank Espada. Francisco Luis Espada, Frank Espada, was born in Utuado, Puerto Rico, and died in Pacifica, California. The year of his birth, 1930. The year of his death, 2014. His mother was born in Utuado. His grandfather was the mayor of Utuado. When Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico in the fall of 2017, I saw Utuado over and over on TV, on the internet, in the headlines. As John Lee Anderson put it in the pages of the New Yorker, Utuado had, quote, become a byword for the island's devastation. Devastation. At least 3,000 people died there, according to one study. Many put the death toll at over 4,000. In the middle of all this, I started talking to my father, even though he's dead. Actually, I started talking to his ashes in a box on my bookshelf. And that was the genesis of this last and final poem. Fittingly enough, it's called Letter to My Father, October 2017. You once said, my reward for this life will be 1,000 pounds of dirt shoveled in my face. You were wrong. You are 7 pounds of ashes in a box, a Puerto Rican flag wrapped around you next to a red brick from the house in Utuado where you were born, all crammed together on my bookshelf. You taught me there is no God, no life after this life, so I know you are not watching me type this letter over my shoulder. When I was a boy, you were God. I watched from the 7th floor of the projects as you walked down into the street to stop a public execution. A big man caught a small man stealing his car, and everyone in Brooklyn heard the car alarm wail of the condemned. He's killing me. That a word from you, the executioner's hand slipped from the hair of the thief. The kid was high, was all you said when you came back to us. When I was a boy and you were God, we flew to Puerto Rico. You said, my grandfather was the mayor of Utuado. His name was Buenaventura. That means good fortune. I believed in your grandfather's name. I heard the tree frogs chanting to each other all night. I saw a banana leaf and elephant palm sprouting from the mountain's belly. I gnawed the mango's pit, and the sweet yellow hair stuck between my teeth. I said to you, you came from another planet. How'd you do it? You said, Every morning, just before I woke up, I saw the mountains. Every morning, I see the mountains. In Utuado, three sisters, all in their 70s, all bedridden, all Pentecostales who only left the house for church, lay sleeping on mattresses spread across the floor when the hurricane gutted the mountain, the way a butcher slices open a dangled pig, and a rolling wall of mud buried them, leaving the fourth sister to stagger into the street, screaming like an unheeded prophet about the end of the world. In Utuado, a man who cultivated a garden of aguacate and carambola, feeding the avocado and star fruit to his nieces from New York, so the trees in his garden beheaded all at once like the soldiers of a beaten army, and so hanged himself. In Utuado, a welder and a handyman rigged a pulley with a shopping cart to ferry rice and beans across the river where the bridge collapsed. Witness the cart swaying above so many hands that raised a sign that told the helicopters, Campamento Los Olvidados, Camp of the Forgotten, Los Olvidados. Wait, 7 hours in line for a government meal of Skittles and Vienna sausage, or a tart to cover the bones of a house with no roof as the fungus grows on their skin from sleeping on mattresses drenched with the spit of the hurricane. They drink the brown water, waiting for microscopic monsters in their bellies to visit plagues upon them. A nurse says, these people are going to have an epidemic. These people are going to die. The president flips rolls of paper towels to a crowd at a church in Guaynabo, Zeus lobbing thunderbolts on the locked ward of his delusions. Down the block, cousin Ricardo, Bernice's boy, says that somebody stole his can of diesel. I heard somebody ask you once where Puerto Rico needed to be free, and you said, 3 pulgadas de sangre en la calle. 3 inches of blood in the street. Now, 3 inches of mud flow through the streets of Utuado, and troops patrol the town as if guarding the vein of copper in the ground, as if a shovel digging graves in the backyard might strike the ore below, as if La Brigada swinging machetes to clear the road might remember the last uprising. I know you are not God. I have the proof. 7 pounds of ashes in a box on my bookshelf. Gods do not die, and yet I want you to be God again. Stride from the crowd to seize the president's arm before another roll of paper towels sails away. Thunder Spanish obscenities in his face. Banish him to a roofless rainstorm in Utuado so he unravels one soaked sheet after another till there is nothing left but his cardboard heart. I promised myself I would stop talking to you, white box of gray grit. You were deaf even before you died. Hear my promise now. I will take you to the mountains, where houses lost like ships at sea rise blue and yellow from the mud. I will open my hands. I will scatter your ashes. En Utuado. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much.
Wherever you are, whether you are in Brooklyn, Taipei, in your car, please clap wherever you are. We can feel it, even if we cannot see you because we're in a Zoom webinar. Wow, Martin, this is such a joy. I want to jump right into it. I know, Camilo, you asked a question. I want to encourage anyone, if you think of a question, feel free to type it in the Q&A box. I want to open, and we talked about this in email before we were here right now. something feels very striking about this collection, and I know your catalog across so many different years. And the first thing you said after you finished Love Song of the Galapagos Tortoise is you said how you chuckled and you talked about how it showed your range. And you said that it was a poem that wouldn't normally be associated with your writing. And I think that there is such richness and range in this collection in a way that I was really taken by. The book is dedicated to your wife, Lauren. And I just wanted to know about how Lauren has informed and shaped not just the genesis of this book, um, but just thinking about how your work always has, and also in this collection, but your work that bears witness and never turns away from the horrors of what human beings are capable of, in equal measure, maybe more so, celebrates the humanity of moments overlooked, even in the midst of despair and oppression. And so I just want to know, how has she informed or maybe shifted the way that you see the world, and in turn, how this book came to be?
Well, I'm going to begin by comparing my wife, Lauren, to Che Guevara. Che Guevara was uh, a revolutionary who believed that revolutionaries were ultimately motivated by the power of love. That's a quote often attributed to him. The Puerto Rican revolutionary Pedro Albizu Campos said something very, very similar, and many years before Che Guevara. And I never really understood that until Lauren came along, because it's such a large and difficult abstraction, not a word like love. And I shied away from it in my poetry. I would never use the word quite literally, and I would downplay the whole idea that what I was doing was coming from some place of extremely intense emotion that we identify with the word love. And what I was looking for was someone who could enlighten me as to what love looks like in action. And it's not that I hadn't seen it before, I had just never seen it so close. You know, Luis Carrera Costa was motivated by great feelings of love, and he would talk about it once in a while. My father was motivated by great feelings of love as an activist. My father would never use the word. You know, if you could push him into he would concede once in a great while. You know I love you. Yeah. Real old school. To me, Lauren has always been one who embodied the ethical principle of service. When I first got to know her, she was teaching, but she was also volunteering at a soup kitchen in Eugene, Oregon. When she ultimately lost her teaching job, she was fired for writing a poem. I adore that. She came 3,000 miles to the other side of the country, in New Jersey, where she was born, and she started teaching again, but she also volunteered at a homeless shelter for women and children. You know, and this is, when I say she's the best person I know, I really mean that. And then, you know, it basically, I think she's had an influence. You can't be in a relationship with someone like that, someone so extraordinary, and not have it basically soak into your marrow. And so it was only a matter of time before it came out, and not just in the love poems, but in every poem. She's in every page of this book, of course, dedicated to her. Now, having said that, there is a section of poems that are love poems. And so along with the political poems, which you expect of me, like the first one and the last one. You also have that, Galapagos tortoise poem, which I, hasten to point out is not only a love poem, it's autobiographical. That is me. That's the way I am. And it's also based on research. Lonesome George was an actual Galapagos tortoise, the last of his kind in one particular island. But there are other love poems in there too. There's a poem dedicated to her as a teacher. There's our wedding sonnet, the sonnet I wrote when we got married in our living room in Shutesbury, Massachusetts, is in there. And all this emerged at a time when we as a society have been smothered in hatred, have been drowning in hatred. That's what drowned Oscar and Valeria. The Rio Grande it's just the water. What drowned them was hatred. And so how are we to resist that? How are we to bring them back into our consciousness, but with love, the kind of love that Lauren embodies every single day in her relationship with me and the work she does as a teacher and the work she does as a writer.
But so beautiful. Oh my gosh. I sensed Lauren across all of these poems. And I don't know Lauren well. I know Lauren a little bit, but just feeling her presence across all of these poems. If I may, before I go to my next question, I have to read the last few lines of the poem that we will sing, because I think it's some of the most breathtaking lines I've ever read. And it's talking about Lauren, I presume. And
yes.
In
kind of weird if it wasn't.
Yeah, the circle of addicts, folded chairs around, and the speaker says, reaching for your hands, in reference to Lauren, as if they could take the spirit in your skin back to the shelter where they slept tonight, touching you the way I touch you sometimes, not in lust, but in astonishment, telling myself I did not imagine you, that you are here, that we will sing. Oh, not in lust, but in astonishment. There's so much astonishment across your work, particularly in this collection. I feel like so many of your poems open as a mirror to horrors that are overlooked or unknown or that people don't want to see. And then they transform into a dream that makes worlds of what could be, of what can take us to something beyond the horrors that we become desensitized to. I'm wondering about your process when you're writing a poem. Is that something you stumble into in the drafting process? Is that something you imagine, like as you map out in your head before you get there? I mean, I emailed you about the poem. And there's so many poems, but Death Rides the Elevator in Brooklyn, or two poems from your father that I was very taken by, or what's the other one? Let me see the other poem that I wanted to ask about.
I can talk about that first one.
Yeah, Death Rides in Brooklyn. Just think about how surprising that the turns are in that.
Yeah, and you know what? It's what is it? 11 lines.
Yeah,
so I think I'll just read it first, and then I'll tell you what process brought it about.
Okay.
And it's another Brooklyn poem. Death Rides the Elevator in Brooklyn. On a winter morning in 1968, my father left to walk the picket line. He rode the elevator in his black coat, hood over his head, in the hour before daybreak. On the third floor, the doors opened. A white man waiting for the elevator stood there, peered at my father in his black coat and hood, in his brown skin, then screamed and fled. The doors closed. My father laughed on the picket line that morning. He laughed for years. The guy thought I was death, he would say. Death rides an elevator in Brooklyn. Mugger, death. Militant, death. Puerto Rican, death. Listening to the story, as the screaming man screamed louder with every telling, I never thought one day my father would be the man standing there waiting for the elevator doors to open. He did not stare or scream or run. He stepped into the elevator, and the doors closed behind him. So, to begin with, that happened.
Wow.
Um, and we always have to say that as poets because we can't always, no one can assume anything about a poem. It's like a song. It's possible I made the whole thing up, but no, that actually did happen. My father was going off to a demonstration very early in the morning on picket line, and we lived in the projects and Wortman Avenue, um, and there we were, uh, and sure enough, the doors open, and a white man saw him, and this close, screamed like crazy, turned around, and ran the hell away. My father thought this was the funniest damn thing he'd ever seen, and my father, you're not going to be surprised to learn, was a storyteller. So he would tell the story, and he would embellish the story a bit, and so the guy, I'm not kidding, screamed louder every time he told it, to the point where he was shrieking at the top of his lungs. Who knows? After a while, the story became the point of the story. And I used to retell it. And I always figured at some point that was gonna turn up in a poem, but I didn't know how. It was filed away in my head. Then my father died. And even then it didn't occur to me that that's where the poem would go. And so one morning I got up and a poem came to me in this order: stanza 1, stanza 2, stanza 3, and I may have changed 3 words.
Wow.
It had been knocking around in my head, and you talked about the turn. It's very important to point that out. There's, for those who may wonder, well, what makes that a poem? The turn in that last stanza is my father becomes the one on the outside looking in. He becomes the one. The elevator really now is the place where death lives, and my father steps on the elevator, and the doors close behind him. And now there's all kinds of things you wouldn't know as deep background. But I wasn't there when my father died. I was thousands of miles away. I didn't get to see him. But when I talked to him, the last time I talked to him, he was very resigned to his fate, not in a serene sort of way. He wasn't religious, but in the sense of someone who knew what was about to happen next. He was resigned to it in that sense, and he got on that elevator. And so it goes from being a story that he would tell it and I would laugh. He would laugh as part of the story, and my job was to laugh as loud as he was laughing.
Mm.
And that scream got louder, and my job was to be the audience. Now you're the audience. And what surprised you surprised me.
Wow.
That turn. And as a poet, the best way to surprise your audience is to surprise yourself first.
Yes. Wow. Martín, it's stunning. And that poem and so many poems, I think that it hits so many notes. A poem like that's personal and it's political and it's hilarious and it's personal and it's hitting all these different things. I want to ask one more question, and then I want to pivot to the Q&A because there's a lot of questions coming in. I want to honor those. The last question I wanted to ask is the last section of the book. You write all these beautiful tributes. The second to last, the penultimate poem that you read, to people that are important in your journey as a person and have made you possible. And almost every interview and thing I've ever done in my life where I talk about being a poet, I talk about you as one of the critical people that made me possible as a writer. Yes. Thinking not just about, and I'll just say this, learning from the way that you utilize narrative to write poems that are unabashedly political, but rooted in such humanity and also poems that are able to be both personal and political and historical and all those things at the same time. Who are the writers that have been guides to you? I think of you as a guide, your work as a blueprint, as something, as a touchstone that I turn to. Who are the writers that made you possible as a poet?
There are really too many to name. And I could name the usual suspects, but you've heard of them all.
Mm.
So, in the moment that I have to answer that question, I want to talk about poets you've never heard of,
I would love that. Yes.
and I want to begin with Jack Agueros. And Jack Agueros was a Puerto Rican poet and fiction writer, playwright, translator. He was also the director of El Museo del Barrio, which was at the time the only Puerto Rican museum in the United States, mainland United States. Jack was my father's friend and political ally. And Jack and I knew Jack when I was very, very young. And then we became friends independently when I was an adult, and we used to end up traveling and reading together as poets. Jack developed early Alzheimer's, as a matter of fact. And there's a poem in this book called Flan. I won't read it because it's too long, but Flan is a poem about Jack. And it's a poem about me grappling with the guilt that I felt when I mistook his Alzheimer's for mere absent-mindedness. I'm absent-minded. Jack had Alzheimer's. And when I figured it out, by the time I figured it out, and so this is a poem which is a tribute to him, and where I try to redeem him and myself at the end of the day by basically saying, yeah, Jack, let's go get some flan. Let's go to the Taza de Oro, which some of you will remember. It's not there anymore, like Jack. So Jack Agueros, find his books. Jack Agueros published several collections of poetry. He got a late start in life, and then it was cut short by the Alzheimer's. But please, correspondence between the Stonehaulers. I wrote the foreword to that book. Sonnets from the Puerto Rican. Lord, is this a psalm? Jack Agueros, Agueros. And don't forget those two little dots over the U.
Beautiful. Beautiful, Martin. So many questions coming from the Q&A. I want to jump right into it. Camilo Perez Bustillo, who you mentioned, had a question. In light of the new administration, Biden, and perhaps some hopeful steps being taken alongside recent news, the massacre of 19 mostly migrants from Guatemala at the border in Mexico, and the violent repression, many of the things that are happening along the border. What is your sense of this particular historical moment and how we navigate it from the perspective of being Latina, Latino, in our communities in this country?
Carpe diem. We have to seize this day. Camilo, I mentioned earlier, is a leader of the movement for human rights on the border. He's a human rights lawyer, and he mentioned the massacre of mostly Guatemalan, I believe, mostly Guatemalan migrants, an atrocity committed on the Mexican border with Guatemala. There's also the reality of the caravans that are out there. They're going to keep coming from Honduras and other places. Thousands coming here, trying to come here. There's Title 42, which of the U.S. Code, which Trump manipulated and used a public health provision, supposedly about COVID, to shut down the border. And public health experts say this totally got little or nothing to do with COVID. The semi-secret police known as ICE you know, we have to seize this moment to say, okay, if we now have a democratic administration in power and we now have a democratic president who has told us in word and deed that he cares about immigrants, then let him show us more. It's all well and good that Joe Biden indeed did what he did for the Dreamers, did what he did to end the Muslim ban. Those are real concrete gains. That he has made these gestures, that he has said the right things. But it's only the beginning. We must not become complacent. We must not put down our weapons. We have to keep the pressure on. We have to raise hell because we are dealing with uh, a crisis, a catastrophe for real human beings on the border and beyond into Central America. And you know, if you, I won't go into it, but if you know anything about the history of the United States in relationship to Central America, we as a nation are responsible for the conflagration in Central America today. And if we took it seriously as a nation, say we have an ethical, we have a moral responsibility to Central America and to those people who are trying to come over, then we want answers from the Biden administration. What are you going to do about Title 42? When are you going to start allowing people to cross over safely? Because that's what killed Oscar and Valeria. They had to go somewhere unsafe in their desperation to cross over. And that's what killed them. We don't want any more Oscars and we don't want any more Valerias. And we want the Biden administration to put its collective money where its collective mouth is.
Oh, and I before I ask this next question, Michael or Serena could put in the link if to buy a copy of Martin's books. I just want to mention there are signed copies you can scoop up right now. I don't know how many, so I would probably order it at this exact moment when the link goes live.
Yeah, and you may have wondered, what is Carlos talking about? Signed copies? Martin's not in Brooklyn. What's happening? Yes, well, it's a miracle. It's not a coincidence. This bookstore is called Books Are Magic. This is magic. It's called, I signed some book plates, and very lovely Norton book plates with the Norton bird, eagle, whatever it is. And I mailed them, sent them by UPS, and they arrived this morning because I checked with Books Are Magic. So you can get a signed copy of this book, even though I am nowhere near the bookstore. Magic.
I highly recommend it. It's such a beautiful book. We're gonna do two more questions from the Q&A. Lisa, one question from Lisa and a question from Gabriel. Lisa asked, "You deal with such heavy and traumatic subjects. How do you protect yourself from being overwhelmed?" And even I might even broaden that to say, how do you write and reckon with such heavy things, and how do you process that?
Who says I protect myself?
Mm.
That is one of the issues you have to confront, that you may not be able to protect yourself. In fact, if you protect yourself emotionally, you will create a distance from the subject, which will rob your poem of its vitality.
Mm.
You need to let that in. Whether you're writing about, you know, something happening on the border, or whether you're writing about something that happened to you here in Brooklyn, or you know, wherever you may be, the price you pay for that, and it, you know, listen, the price I paid to write the poem Floaters does not compare to the price paid by the people who drowned in Rio Grande, right? So it's a small price to pay, but a price indeed. You have to allow the ghosts in. You know, I used to say you have to walk around a place like that, as Camilo has, not far from where they were drowned. You have to soak up the ghosts through the soles of your feet. You have to let it in, because if you keep the emotions at arm's length, you'll create something that is diminished in emotional impact for the reader or the listener. And it can get it can get crazy. I was writing a poem once about Chile and developed I started getting physically ill. It was about torture. I started getting physically ill. And I was on the phone with a friend of mine who's an authority on this history in Chile. And he said, "You're sick and you're writing this poem? Stop writing it. Stop writing it until your fever goes away." So I did. He said, the same things happened to me. He's a historian, Steve Stern. And so, I'm not saying that happens to me all the time, but on that one occasion it did. And I had to take a break and then come back to it and finish it. So, but is it worth doing? Hell yeah.
Yeah. I feel like anybody who knows your work can feel that intimacy and intensity to whatever you're talking about. Martin, my gosh. So one final question. Beloved friend, poet Gabriela Ramirez asked, what have you come to understand about grief writing El Morir Viví and Morir Soñando? And maybe expand that, because maybe you have not come to understand anything about grief. I don't know if you have or have not. But I guess what has writing either El Morir Viví and Morir Soñando or other poems taught you or helped you in your understanding about grief?
Well, I mean, to a certain extent, I will never understand grief because I don't understand death. I don't know why people die. But what brings me any understanding of grief at all, unfortunately, is practice. It's like anything else. I think I can get better at it. But going beyond my own particular grief in terms of something like El Morir Viví is a poem about my father and his death. When I write a poem like the one that you heard tonight, Morir Soñando, that's coming from a somewhat different place in this respect. I have become accustomed to writing elegies as a ceremony. And it so happens that poets sometimes serve the same function as preachers in this increasingly secular society. That is to say, people come to us when they crave meaning. We as poets are expected to find the meaning in the apparently meaningless, like the void, like death. And so I have been called upon to speak at memorial services, one right after the other. At one point, I spoke at 6 memorial services in 12 months.
Wow.
And there's a certain vocabulary you develop when you are doing this. And so I write the poem, not feeling that it's going to console me, because they don't generally console me. I don't write the poem figuring I'm going to have great illumination. I write the poem because somebody else needs it. I write the poem because I want it to be useful, like a hammer or nails, to somebody who is grieving.
Wow.
And that might be my own family, it might be an extended family, it might be a community, like the community in Brooklyn that mourned Luis Carden Acosta when he passed away. And I've discovered that one way of doing that, one way of bringing about that consolation, was to put something in the elegy you wouldn't expect to see there. So it goes way beyond lamentation. In fact, there may be very little lamentation at all. In that poem, Morir Soñando, it's not a lament. It's a celebration of Luis Carden Acosta. There is joy in it. There is gratitude for my having known him and for his mentorship of me. And there is some self-deprecating humor in the poem. In the poem, that kid is a papa's ass. He's in law school. Absolutely. My goodness. First year, studying law school Latin. I was very impressed with myself. And I really did. This is how, street meets school, I had a boom box and I was playing classical guitar in the boom box. I mean, can you imagine anything more pretentious?
Uh,
And so I set myself up in the poem
yes.
to then receive his wisdom,
Yeah.
and I do, and that's and so the joy and the gratitude come from that, and so that's for anybody out there tonight who knew Luis, who remembers him. That's for you.